Some people say I'm sorry, even when they're right. Not because they're confused, not because they don't know the truth, but because somewhere along the way, being right started to feel dangerous. So they learned something else instead. They learned how to soften their voice before anyone could raise theirs. They learned how to take the blame before it could be given. They learned how to end tension before it even had the chance to grow. And now, it happens without thinking. You correct someone, then immediately say sorry. You explain yourself, then apologize for explaining. You feel hurt, but somehow you're the one trying to fix it. Not because you should, but because something in you says it's safer this way. Safer to shrink the moment. Safer to smooth things over. Safer to make yourself smaller, so nothing escalates. And the strange part is, from the outside, it looks like kindness. It looks like politeness. It looks like emotional maturity. But inside, it doesn't feel like that. Inside, it feels like pressure, like walking on invisible lines, like constantly adjusting yourself just to keep things calm. And over time, you stop asking a very important question. Why am I the one apologizing when I didn't do anything wrong? Because the habit becomes automatic, fast, quiet, almost invisible, a reflex. And most people never stop long enough to notice it's even happening. But once you do notice it, you can't unsee it. You start hearing it in your own voice. You start catching it in small moments. The quick sorry that slips out before you even think. And that's when it gets uncomfortable. Because now, it's not just something you do, it's something you've been trained to do. And that training didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere specific, somewhere earlier, somewhere deeper than just being polite. But this habit doesn't start where you think it does. You're in a conversation. Nothing dramatic, nothing extreme, just a normal moment. Someone says something that isn't accurate, or they misunderstand what you meant, or they shift the blame onto you, slightly, casually, just enough to change the tone. And you feel it, that small pause in the air, that shift in energy. You know, clearly, quietly, that you didn't do anything wrong. You can see it. You can explain it. You can even feel the words forming in your mind. Calm, reasonable, correct. But before those words fully arrive, you say it. Sorry. It slips out quickly, smoothly, almost effortlessly, like it was already waiting at the edge of your mouth. Not because you agree, not because you're at fault, but because something inside you wants this moment to end, now. You feel it in your body before you even notice it in your mind. A slight tightness in your chest. Your shoulders pull in just a little. Your breath gets shallow, like your body is preparing for something uncomfortable. There's a quiet urgency, not panic, but pressure. An urge to smooth things over, to lower the tension, to bring everything back to neutral. So you adjust. You soften your tone. You make your response smaller. You take up less space in the conversation. And just like that, the moment settles. The other person relaxes. The tension fades. Everything moves on. And on the surface, it looks like nothing happened. But inside, something did. Because a second ago, you were about to stand your ground. You were about to express something real. You were about to be clear. And then you replaced it with an apology. And your mind quickly steps in to justify it. It's not worth arguing. Let me just end this. I don't want to make it a big deal. It sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. It sounds like you're choosing peace. But if you pay closer attention, there's something else underneath it. Something quieter. Something you don't usually question. Because this isn't just a decision you're making in the moment. It's a pattern. One that shows up in small conversations, in quick interactions, in moments that seem too minor to matter.
But they add up. And over time, you start doing it before you even realize there was another option, before you consider explaining, before you think about disagreeing, before you even check if you should apologize at all. It just happens, automatically, like your system is trying to solve something before you fully understood the problem. And the strange part is, this doesn't feel random. It feels familiar, like you've been here before. Like you felt this exact tension, this exact pressure many times, long before this moment. Which raises a deeper question. Because if you're not actually sorry, and if you know you're not wrong, then why does your mind rush to apologize, as if something is at risk? Why does a simple disagreement feel like something that needs to be fixed immediately? Why does your body react like it's trying to prevent something from happening? Because what you're doing in that moment isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about avoiding something you've already learned to expect. Something older than the conversation you're in right now. Something that taught you, quietly and repeatedly, that moments like this don't always stay small.
Imagine a child growing up in a place where small moments don't always stay small. A place where tone matters more than truth. Where timing matters more than honesty. Where saying the right thing can still lead to the wrong reaction. The child doesn't know this at first. At first, they speak freely. They correct things when they notice them. They ask questions. They explain themselves. Simple, natural things. But then, something starts to happen. They speak up, and the room changes. A parent's voice sharpens. A look appears. Quick, but enough to signal something's off. Maybe it turns into a lecture. Maybe it becomes silence. Maybe it becomes something heavier. Something the child doesn't fully understand, but feels deeply. And it doesn't have to be loud to leave an impression. Sometimes it's subtle. A sigh, an eye roll, being cut off mid-sentence, being told, "Don't talk back." Or worse, being ignored completely, like what they said didn't even exist. So the child starts paying attention, not to what's true, but to what happens after they speak. They begin to notice patterns. When they disagree, things get tense. When they explain too much, someone gets irritated. When they try to be right, it somehow turns into conflict. And slowly, quietly, something shifts. They stop focusing on being correct. They start focusing on keeping things calm. Because calm feels safe. Calm means no raised voices, no cold silence, no sudden changes in mood that they have to navigate. So they adjust. They pause before speaking. They soften what they say. They hold things back. And sometimes they do something even more powerful. They take the blame. Not because they believe it, but because it works. One day, in the middle of one of those tense moments, they say it. Sorry.
But underneath that, something else has been decided. That harmony is safer than truth. That approval matters more than accuracy. That keeping the peace is more important than being understood. And the child grows up. The environment changes, the people change, The situations become completely different. But the pattern stays. Because it was never just about those moments. It was about what those moments taught. And what they taught didn't disappear. It settled in, quietly, deeply, automatically. So now, years later, in a completely different room with completely different people, the same thing happens. Tension appears, and before anything else, the apology comes out. What's happening here isn't random. It's a pattern your mind has been building for a long time. Every time tension showed up and an apology made it disappear, your brain took note. Not in words, not in clear thoughts, but in connections. It started linking things together. Apologizing leads to relief. Apologizing calms the situation. Apologizing keeps things from getting worse. And on the other side, disagreeing creates tension. Standing your ground risks conflict. Being right can change the mood in ways that don't feel safe. So over time, your mind simplifies it. Not into a rule you can see, but into a reaction you can feel. When tension appears, move towards safety. And for you, safety looks like ending the tension quickly. So the apology becomes the fastest path. You don't stop to weigh the facts. You don't pause to ask, am I actually wrong? Because in that moment, the goal isn't accuracy. The goal is relief. And your body knows exactly how to get there. That's why it feels automatic. It happens before logic has time to step in, before you can fully process what's happening. It's quick, efficient, familiar, like reaching for something you've used 100 times before. And this pattern doesn't stay limited to obvious conflict. It starts showing up in smaller and smaller moments. A slight misunderstanding, a change in tone, even a pause in someone's response. Anything that feels like it could turn into tension, your system moves to prevent it. And it does that by making you adjust first. Now, there's another layer to this, because it's not just about avoiding uncomfortable moments. It's also about preserving connection. At some point, your mind learned that tension can lead to distance, a shift in how someone sees you, a change in how they respond to you, a subtle withdrawal you can feel, even if no one says it out loud. And that possibility matters. So the apology doesn't just protect you from conflict, it protects you from disconnection, from being misunderstood, from being seen as difficult, from creating a moment that might push someone away. So even when you're right, your mind quietly asks a different question. Not, is this true, but is this safe? And if the answer feels uncertain, it chooses the safer option, even if that means stepping away from your own position, even if that means taking on something that isn't yours. And after doing this enough times, something shifts inside you. Being right starts to feel uncomfortable. Not because it is, but because of what it used to lead to. And keeping the peace starts to feel necessary. Not because it always is, but because it once protected something important. So the behavior continues. Smooth, automatic, justified. And from the outside, it still looks like kindness, like patience, like emotional control. But inside, it's something else. It's a constant adjustment, a quiet calculation happening in real time. How do I keep this calm? How do I make sure this doesn't turn into something bigger? Even if that means shrinking your side of the conversation. Even if that means letting things go that matter to you. And here's where it gets more complicated. Because the more this works, the less you question it. The less you notice what you're giving up in the process. and the harder it becomes to separate what you actually feel from what you've trained yourself to say. But there's a part of this pattern that most people never see. Something subtle but powerful. Because the real impact isn't just in the apology itself, it's in what repeated apologies slowly start to change inside you. And once you see that part, you start to understand why this habit doesn't just stay a habit. It becomes something much deeper.
And the pattern doesn't fade. It actually gets stronger. Because every time you smooth things over, it works. The conversation stays calm, the tension doesn't grow, the moment passes without turning into something bigger. From the outside, this looks like a strength. People start to notice it. You're easy to talk to. You don't make things complicated. You're understanding. And those reactions matter because they reinforce the behavior. They tell your mind, quietly and repeatedly, this is the right way to handle things. So the next time tension shows up, your brain doesn't hesitate. It chooses the same path again. Not because it's the only option, but because it's the one that has worked the most. And over time, something subtle begins to shift inside you. At first, you're aware of what you're doing. You know you're apologizing just to keep things smooth. But then, that awareness starts to fade. The line between what you feel and what you say begins to blur. You start pausing, not to express yourself,
But to check yourself. Am I reacting too strongly? Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe I should just let it go. And slowly, your confidence in your own perspective starts to weaken. Not all at once, not in an obvious way, but in small, repeated moments. You begin to second-guess your reactions. You question whether your feelings are valid. You replay situations, trying to figure out if you were too much. And the more you do this, the less certain you feel. Because instead of trusting your first instinct, you've trained yourself to override it, to soften it, to adjust it, to reshape it into something more acceptable, something less likely to create tension. And that internal dialogue becomes familiar. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I misunderstood. Even in situations where you were clear, even in moments where you were right. And while this is happening internally, something else is happening externally. People begin to respond to you based on what you show them.
If you apologize quickly, they assume you're at fault. If you step back, they step forward. If you adjust, they expect it. Not because they're always trying to take advantage, but because you've created a pattern they can rely on. A pattern where you absorb the tension, where you carry the responsibility, where you make things easier for everyone else. And without realizing it, you begin to train people how to treat you. You show them that you'll be the one to smooth things over, the one to bend slightly, the one to let things pass. So over time, they stop questioning it. They stop checking if you're actually okay with something. They stop considering your side as much as they should, because the pattern feels normal, predictable, stable. But underneath that stability, something is building. Because every time you adjust outward, you move slightly inward. You hold something back. You let something go unsaid. You step away from something that mattered, even if only a little. And those moments don't disappear. They accumulate, quietly, until one day, it's not just about small conversations anymore. It starts showing up in places that matter more. Decisions that affect you, relationships that shape your life. situations where staying quiet or apologizing changes the outcome in a deeper way. And this is where the pattern becomes something else entirely. Because there's one situation where this habit doesn't just keep the peace. It starts to cost you something you can't easily get back.
And eventually, this stops being about small moments. It starts appearing in the moments that actually shape your life. In relationships, where someone crosses a line and instead of addressing it directly, you soften your reaction. You say, "It's okay. Don't worry about it. Sorry, I probably took it the wrong way." Even when you didn't. Even when something inside you felt hurt immediately. Because the moment tension enters the room, your instinct is still the same. Keep the peace. Reduce the discomfort. Make the moment easier to survive. And sometimes, this happens so quickly, you don't even realize you abandoned your own feelings until much later. Then, it shows up at work. Someone takes credit for your idea. Someone blames you for a mistake you didn't make. Someone speaks over you in a meeting. And you feel that same pressure rise again. You could correct them. You could clarify what actually happened. You could hold your position calmly and clearly. But instead, you hesitate. Your mind starts calculating the emotional cost. Will this create tension? Will I seem difficult? Will this turn into conflict? And before you even fully decide what you believe, you soften yourself again. You apologize for speaking. You apologize for questioning something. You apologize just for taking up space in the conversation. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you don't see what's happening, but because somewhere deep inside, maintaining emotional safety still feels more important than defending your position. And then there are boundaries. The moments where you say yes when you mean no. The moments where someone pushes too far and you still try to make them comfortable while it's happening. You explain yourself too much. You smile when you're uncomfortable. You apologize for needing time, space, respect, understanding. As if your needs are inconveniences. As if asking to be treated properly requires an apology first. And slowly, this creates something dangerous. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet. A quiet buildup of things you never said. Feelings you buried instantly. Moments where you abandoned your own perspective to preserve someone else's comfort. And at first, you barely notice the cost. Because externally, everything still looks calm. The arguments are avoided. The relationships continue. The atmosphere stays smooth. But internally, something starts building underneath the surface. Resentment. Not explosive resentment, not obvious anger, just a quiet exhaustion. The exhaustion of constantly adjusting yourself, constantly translating your feelings into something more acceptable, constantly swallowing reactions before they fully exist. And because you rarely express it, it stays trapped inside you. So instead of releasing it outward, you carry it inward. Then another feeling starts appearing beside it. A feeling that's harder to describe. Invisibility. Not because people literally can't see you, but because your real thoughts, reactions, and boundaries slowly become hidden behind constant accommodation. People know the version of you that keeps things easy, the version that doesn't push back too much, the version that apologizes quickly. But they don't always know the version underneath that, the one that disagreed, the one that felt hurt, the one that wanted to speak honestly but stopped halfway. And eventually, you begin to feel distant, even inside your own conversations, present physically, but absent emotionally. Because every time you replaced your truth with an apology, you removed a small piece of yourself from the moment. And the strangest part is, most of this happens silently. No one sees the internal debate. No one hears the thoughts you swallowed. They only hear the apology. Then later, usually when you're alone, the conversation comes back. You replay it in your mind. The tone, the pause, the exact moment you gave up your position. And suddenly, the words arrive too late. What you should have said, what you wanted to say, what was actually true. You replay the scene differently in your head, clearer, stronger, more honest. But in the real moment, your survival instinct moved faster than your voice. And that's the deeper issue here. It's not the apology itself. The apology is only the surface. The real issue is what the apology replaces. Your voice, your clarity, your position, your right to exist fully inside the moment without immediately shrinking yourself to protect everyone else from discomfort. Because every automatic apology sends a quiet message inward.
Your feelings can wait. Your perspective is less important. Keeping others comfortable matters more. And after enough repetition, you stop noticing how much of yourself you've been giving away in small pieces. But this leads to a realization that changes the entire meaning of this behavior. Because once you understand why your mind learned to do this, you stop seeing yourself as weak, and you start seeing something much more important instead.
And this is the moment where the entire pattern starts to look different. Because once you see where it came from, you stop asking the question, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking a different one instead. What did this behavior help me survive? That changes everything. Because this was never simply weakness. It was adaptation. At some point in your life, apologizing protected you. It helped you move through environments that felt emotionally unpredictable. It helped you avoid escalation. It helped you stay connected to people you depended on. In certain moments, it probably worked incredibly well. It kept arguments from getting worse. It helped you read emotional shifts quickly. It taught you how to sense tension before anyone else noticed it. And when you're younger, especially in environments where emotional safety feels uncertain, those adaptations matter. You do what you need to do to maintain stability, even if you don't realize you're doing it. So your mind became highly aware of reactions, highly aware of tone changes, highly aware of emotional danger. And apologizing became part of the system that kept everything manageable. That's why this habit can feel so deeply wired into you, because your brain doesn't see it as weakness. Your brain sees it as protection. Protection from conflict, protection from rejection, protection from emotional distance. Which is why people who apologize constantly are often not weak at all. In many cases, they're extremely emotionally aware. They learned how to read rooms early, how to sense discomfort quickly, how to keep situations from becoming emotionally unsafe. But here's the difficult part. What once protected you can quietly begin limiting you. Because the environments change. You grow older. Your relationships change. Your life changes. But the response stays the same. And eventually, the same strategy that once kept you safe starts keeping you small. You begin apologizing in moments where you no longer need protection. You shrink yourself in conversations that no longer require survival mode. You silence parts of yourself, even when the danger is no longer there. And that's why healing this pattern isn't about becoming cold. It's not about never apologizing again. It's not about becoming argumentative or emotionally distant. The goal isn't to remove kindness. The goal is awareness. To notice the difference between a genuine apology and an automatic one. A genuine apology comes from clarity. I hurt someone. I misunderstood something. I need to take responsibility. But the automatic apology comes from fear. Fear of tension. Fear of disapproval. Fear of what might happen if you fully hold your position. And once you start noticing that difference, something changes internally. You pause a little longer before saying sorry. You begin asking yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Or am I trying to make this moment emotionally safe as quickly as possible? And for many people, that question feels uncomfortable at first, because it forces you to realize how often your apologies were never really about guilt. They were about protection. Protection that became automatic. And maybe for the first time, you begin to see yourself with more accuracy. Not as overly sensitive, not as weak, not as someone who just apologizes too much, but as someone whose mind learned a pattern very early and repeated it for years because it believed it was necessary. And when you understand that, something important happens. The shame around the behavior starts to loosen because you realize there was always a reason for it. There was always a history behind it, a logic behind it, a deeper emotional memory underneath it. And that realization creates space. Space to respond differently. Space to slow down. Space to stop abandoning yourself automatically in moments of tension. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consciously. Because awareness is where the pattern begins to lose its control. And eventually, you start discovering something unfamiliar. That disagreement doesn't always lead to rejection. That expressing yourself doesn't always create danger. That being right doesn't automatically destroy connection. You begin learning that you can remain calm without disappearing. That you can hold your position without becoming cruel. That you can stop apologizing for things that never required an apology in the first place. And maybe the most important realization of all is this. You were never apologizing because you were weak. You were apologizing because your mind learned a long time ago that peace was safer than truth. And if you've ever caught yourself saying sorry, then sitting alone later wondering why you said it at all, if you've ever replayed conversations in your head, thinking of the words you wish you had used instead, if you've ever felt the need to make yourself smaller just to keep the atmosphere comfortable, then you've already started noticing something most people never see: the pattern. And once you notice the pattern, you can begin changing the story behind it. Hit the subscribe button to stay with me. There's more coming.